All right, let's begin. Okay, so there's a few things that I want to just mention, and one of them is we were discussing at some point, maybe 2 days ago, the Brochos Kayanim, and I mentioned, I'm not sure how it came up, but I mentioned that I think it came up because someone asked about the difference between Kayanim and the rest of Klal Yisrael. And I mentioned that the Kayanim were given a special commandment to bless the Jewish people. And I mentioned that it seems that an Israelite is not really supposed to do the Kohen's bracha, because really it's a special bracha for the Kohen to bless the Jewish people. A few of you asked questions on that. The Chazan says the Chazan sometimes says the Brochos Kayanim, and we say the Brochos Kayanim ourselves in when we recite the blessing on the Torah. If someone asks for, we bless our children sometimes with the Brochos Kayanim. So it seems like it's not only the Kayanim who give the bracha. So there's a lot of challenging questions on what I said, but it turns out that it is a Gemara. There's a Gemara in Ksubis that mentions that if a Israelite does Nesias Kapayim, does the lifting of the hands and blessing the Kohanim, he transgresses a positive commandment, because Hashem told the Kohanim to give this bracha, and the Israelites are not supposed to be giving this bracha with Nesias Kapayim. So it doesn't apply always, meaning you can say Yivarechecha and give people brachas Yivarechecha, but you're not allowed to lift your hands and give that bracha. You're not allowed to go, let's say, when the Kohanim are blessing the congregation, you can't go with them and do the blessing with them with Nesias Kapayim. So that is a prohibition. It's a positive commandment for the Kohanim, and what's implied from that positive mitzvah is that there's that it's prohibited for an Israelite. It's a lav haba mechlal aseh. It means that it's only for the Kohanim to do, and that would be a prohibition. It would be transgressing that positive commandment if an Israelite would raise their hands. So that's just to get back on something that we were looking into. I mentioned to you I wasn't 100% sure, so I did look it up, and there is a source that it's a transgression of a positive commandment to lift one's hands, Nesias Kapayim, and bless the others with the Brochos Kayanim bracha. Yes, Ben.
I asked about the Chazan that is an Israelite, because I think that the Kohanim are not giving us the blessing. They are just saying that Hashem will bless us. And the blessing really comes from Hashem.
Well, I mean, the translation of Yivarechecha Hashem, but I think that is called a blessing. Yivarechecha, they are blessing us that Hashem should bless us. Yivarechecha Hashem. Hashem should bless you. That's their bracha. I think it's both.
Who are you saying is not supposed to raise their hands? A sabra, somebody from...
No. When I say an Israelite, I mean a regular Jew, not a Kohen. Right. Okay. There's different terms used for each group of the Yidden. There's the Kohen, the Levite, and the rest of the Jewish people are called Israelites. It has nothing to do with the land of Israel.
Okay, I'm sorry, I didn't understand that.
It means any Jewish person. But when you exclude the Kohanim, you normally use the term Israelites. If you want to exclude the Levites and the Kohanim, you normally use that term, Israelites, Yisrael.
So does that mean a Levite can give the bracha if the Kohanim is not available or not there?
Absolutely not. No.
Okay.
He's also called it's called a stranger, actually. The real term used is a zar, a non-Kohen. A stranger is not allowed to do that bracha. It was specifically to the children or descendants of Aaron.
Okay, exclusive to them. Okay.
Only the Kohanim. Okay. Also, the Gemara that we're learning, I must say, it's a very, very important Gemara.
We're on what, 21B now?
We're on 21B, and we're going to we are going to discuss the Tosfos over here. Because the Tosfos here is a very important Tosfos, a very a practical, applicable Tosfos. So I want to discuss it at more length, and it's based on the Gemara. So we have to talk a little more about the Gemara that we learned yesterday. So the Gemara that we learned yesterday spoke about a person who came to shul late. And when he came to shul late, he found that the community, the congregation, had already started davening, the Shemona Esrei. Now this applies to Shachris, to the morning prayer. It also applies to Mincha, the afternoon prayer. And to the Musaf prayer could apply. The actual Gemara statement does not apply to Ma'ariv, but we would need to try to apply similar laws to Ma'ariv. What do I mean? What I mean is that you came to shul late. Now, if you start davening your Shemona Esrei at the same time that when you arrive, you are going to miss some of the replies that are appropriate for you to reply when the chazan, when the cantor says his repetition. You're going to miss them out because you're going to be in the middle of the Shemona Esrei. You're not going to be allowed to reply to some of those responses that you're supposed to make. You're not allowed to do a response. Like, for example, when the chazan says Kedusha, which is sanctifying Hashem, when the chazan says that statement, those few sentences, you're supposed to reply with the chazan, and with the congregation. But if you're in the middle of Shemona Esrei, you're not going to be allowed to because you can't talk. You're in the middle of your Shemona Esrei. So it becomes complicated. How do you deal with that? On the one hand, you don't want to push off your davening till later. And at the same time, if you daven now, you are going to miss out some of those responses. What takes precedence is, in addition to the fact that there is an importance in davening Shemona Esrei now. Why do you want to daven Shemona Esrei now? You want to daven Shemona Esrei now because you want it to be considered that you're davening with the congregation. So if you daven Shemona Esrei now when the congregation is davening, it adds a element to your prayer that it adds strength to your prayer. One of the Talmudic statements that we learned, is that there's a big difference between praying with a minyan, davening with a congregation, and not. When you daven with the congregation, even if you don't have the right concentration, Hashem listens to your prayer. There was a verse that the Gemara brought. Hein kel kabir lo yimas. Hashem is not disgusted with a kabir, with a large amount of people. So that means that even though your prayer maybe doesn't deserve to be answered, but somehow it gets grandfathered in when the other prayers are all being accepted, your prayer gets accepted along with theirs. It gets invited as well. It's taken in as well. So there's a great benefit of davening with the minyan. On the other hand, you're davening with the minyan, but if you cannot do the responses, that also is a very important part of the prayer. And the question is, does that override? What overrides what? What's more important? So let's go over the Gemara that we learned yesterday. The Gemara that we learned yesterday said, we had two statements. One was Rav Huna, which is 4 lines from the top of the page. If you want to look at your Gemaras, we had the statement of Rav Huna that if a person came late to shul and they saw that they were in the middle of Shemona Esrei, so if he is able to finish before the Chazan reaches Moedim, then he can daven now. What does that mean? He can daven now. He can recite the prayers and fulfill the tefillah, fulfill the mitzvah of davening with a minyan, because he's not going to lose out in the response of Moedim. He wants to do the response of Moedim, and with the congregation. That's one of the important responses. Or I really shouldn't translate it that way, because the common explanation of the Gemara is a little different than that. There is a few commentaries that do explain it that way, but I really should tell you that the more well-known explanation is he should, if he's going to reach Moedim and be able to bow down with the congregation. Moedim, here it's not only about the response, but it's about his involvement in doing what the congregation is doing, his showing that he's part of the community and he's not separating himself and arguing with what the community is doing, protesting, so to speak, and denying God. So there's an importance of bowing down for Moedim. And if he's in the middle of Shemona Esrei, he's not going to be able to bow down when the congregation bows for Moedim. So let me summarize what I just said again. There are benefits of him davening the Shemona Esrei now, and that is because he wants to daven together with the congregation. There's a benefit of him not davening now, because we want him either to do certain responses or to bow down when the community, the congregation bows at Moedim. We want him to bow at Moedim. So these are the two reasons why maybe he shouldn't daven, because he needs to be available to bow down or to give certain responses. So you have both. We're fighting between these two important elements of prayer. One is davening with the minyan, and it's called tefillah b'tzibur, and the other one is doing the responses together with the congregation. Now, in addition to tefillah b'tzibur, you might have another issue, is the fact that the guy might be in a rush. And being in a rush, he also wants to daven now, but he might be more important for him to say, you know what, you're in a rush, but don't miss out. This is much more. This is very important, and you really are halachically supposed to wait until you respond to the certain responses that are an obligation. So that's what we're dealing with. So the first opinion of Rav Huna is that if you want to say Shemona Esrei now and fulfill tefillah b'tzibur and also, finish your davening, you have to take into consideration, are you going to bow with the congregation Moedim? Are you going to bow down with the congregation Moedim? If you will reach the end, you'll finish your Shemona Esrei, so you'll be able to bow down for Moedim, then you have no problem, because you're covering all grounds. You're covering the tefillah, but you're davening with the minyan, and at the same time, you're also doing the Moedim that you need to. You need to bow down with the congregation. So if you're covering that, then they have no problem. What about if you're going to miss bowing down with the congregation because you're not going to be able to finish and conclude? You're a slow davener, and you're not going to finish your prayer before the congregation says Moedim and where they bow. So then we tell the guy, you know what? You really halachically are supposed to wait. You should not daven right now. Wait. And when you reach, when after you do the Moedim, then that's when after the congregation does Moedim, you do it with them. Then you'll daven later. So that is what we're dealing with. I should also mention that there is there needs to be some clarity. Where exactly are you holding in the prayers? Because we've learned earlier that a person is not supposed to interrupt between Goal Yisrael, the blessing of Geula, and Tefillah. So when a person recites the bracha about redemption, which is right before the Shemona Esrei begins, Goal Yisrael, Hashem redeemed Israel, that blessing, which is after the Shema, as we've learned that there's blessings before the Shema, a blessing after the Shema. So there is the blessing after the Shema is the blessing of Goal Yisrael. That blessing, you're not supposed to interrupt by between that in the tefillah, in the prayer. So how does that, how does this work with either responding to certain responses that you're supposed to do and bowing down if you already said the bracha Goal Yisrael? So I will tell you that if you already said the bracha Goal Yisrael, we're not talking about these scenarios here. Because if you said the bracha Goal Yisrael, you're really not supposed to interrupt it all. You're supposed to go straight into your Shemona Esrei. So once you say that bracha, you daven, you say the Shemona Esrei, and you don't deal with it. What we're talking about here is you didn't actually say the bracha Goal Yisrael. We're telling you don't say the bracha Goal Yisrael. Wait before you get up to that bracha. Like let's say, a paragraph before it, you wait until you either do the modim or the next Gemara tells us about the Kedusha, and then you could do the Goal Yisrael blessing with the Shemona Esrei. Again, when we're talking about the Shemona Esrei here, that we're telling you not to start it, we're also telling you don't say the final bracha Goal Yisrael. In other words, because that bracha goes together with the Shemona Esrei, the bracha Goal Yisrael, it's not supposed to be interrupted. You're not supposed to separate Geula with Tefillah, redemption with the prayer. And that we learned about a while back. A few of you have had some questions. I see. Ben, what's your question?
Yeah,
Ben?
I wanted to ask, when you say davening, when you come in late, where is the shortest that you can start? Can you start from the Shemona Esrei and then get to Modim together with a Chazan? Or do you have to start
there's
from
a big
Rabbi
discussion.
Ishmael or before that, or what?
There is a different halachas about if a person is running late and they come to shul late, but because they want to daven with the congregation, there are certain parts of the davening they are allowed to skip. And generally, the most important parts that they don't skip for Ashkenazim are Baruch Sha'amar, Ashrei, Yishtabach, and then they just go from Yishtabach, they go straight, they just continue forward from, but the Baruch Sha'amar, Ashrei, Yishtabach are the bare minimum. I believe Sephardic, according to the Sephardic Poskim, I believe that there is a leniency. They could start at Yishtabach maybe, or after Yishtabach. I have to look it up, but I don't believe they follow that. Now, they're among Kabbalists, as well as among Hasidim, and possibly others, there is a concept of not skipping, because since each part of the prayer is connected to a certain world, you can't go to the next world without each world that you're climbing up upon. You can't reach without climbing each step, and therefore there are opinions, at least according to Kabbalah, not to skip. So from a halachic perspective, a person is supposed to daven with the minyan, so there would be a reason to skip certain parts of the prayer. From the Kabbalistic perspective, there's reason not to skip, and a person should daven straight and not skip anything. And so the best answer to follow everything is don't come late. But that's
there is people that come
skipping.
late. They come late and they ask you, what page are you on? There's people that come late, they ask you, what page are you on? And they start from that page. They don't
So
consider anything before that.
Yeah, they missed out in the Levi Yitzchak Senior Academy. You got to tell them about our program.
Right.
Okay. Susan had a question. Susan, you still have a question?
Ben sort of asked my question.
Oh, okay, good. Okay.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay. Ruben.
Yes, please. These three pieces that you mentioned, Baruch She'amar, Ashrei, and Yishtabach, do those correspond to the first three worlds? Or the first world, the first, second world?
No.
Okay.
I'd have to look up each of the, but
But
it's
it-
not,
Not
no, as far
asking.
as I understand, I think they're all in the same category. Now, if a person has more time than Baruch Shem Ashrei Yishtabach, then they should do, then they're supposed to do more, like the Halalukas, the Oz Yashir, and so on. So there's, if they have a little extra time, they should do more than that, than Baruch Shem Ashrei Yishtabach. And then, of course, if you follow the other view, which is not to skip anything, so then there's nothing to talk about. You don't skip anything. So, but that's basically a just a little summary of some of the halachis of skipping. Getting back to our Gemara, so we have this opinion of Rav Huna that said you got to make sure to bow with the congregation when they do the maidim. Otherwise, it looks like you are sort of going against. You're a kaifer. You're like denying Hashem, and everyone is bowing to Hashem, and you're standing. Nope, I'm not bowing. And so it doesn't. It looks like you are refusing to bow to Hashem. So that's something that's it's prohibited. Of course, you don't want to look like a kaifer, and therefore you should make sure to wait until the congregation says maidim and say maidim and bow down for the maidim with them, and then of course you could you'll do your davening. Now, the next opinion, or of course, I should say, if you can finish your Shemona Esrei and still reach and be able to do Maidim with the congregation, then that's also acceptable. But if you can't finish your Shemona Esrei, then of course you wait until afterwards. Okay. Then the next opinion was Rabbi Shua ben Levi. Rabbi Shua ben Levi said, you got to make sure that you say the Kedusha, you have to respond to the Kedusha with the congregation and with the Chazan. And so you're going to be reciting Kedusha. Kedusha is when they say the Kadosh, 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 and Baruch Kavod Hashem Im Kaimai, Yimleich Hashem Li'olam. These sentences where we sanctify Hashem similar to the angels, and therefore this is a very important part of the davening. And if you're in the middle of Shemona Esrei, you're not going to be able to say it. And therefore, you have to make sure that you'll finish your Shemona Esrei before the Chazan reaches this point. If you're going to finish, fine. If not, you should wait until the Chazan reaches this point, and then you could start your Shemona Esrei. So that's the two statements in the Gemara. And the Gemara tried to figure out what is the argument between Rav Huna and Rabbi Shua ben Levi. And the Gemara explained that Rav Huna holds that if you're in a shul and there's a minyan there, even if you're not with them, you could still say the Kedusha yourself in your own Shemona Esrei. You can say the Kedusha, Kadosh, Kadosh, Kadosh. Normally, you cannot do that because you don't have 10 men. It's prohibited for you to say the Kedusha without 10 men. But here, you have 10 men in shul. And therefore, you would be allowed to say the Kedusha in your own private Shemona Esrei. And therefore, Rav Huna has no problem if you miss out in the response that the congregation is doing because you're in the middle of your own personal Shemona Esrei and you cannot respond with the congregation, because the thing is, you will respond when you yourself are saying the Shemona Esrei. You'll do the Kedusha yourself. even though it's not with the congregation, but you have 10 men in the same room, and they're in the, and because of that, you're allowed to do Kedusha on your own. So Rav Huna has no problem with the Kedusha issue. With responding to Kedusha, he has no problem. He says, you're going to miss it because you're in the middle of your own Shemona Esrei? No problem. You do it yourself. You say it in your own Shemona Esrei. But the Moedim, when you bow, that's a problem. That you can't do. And that you need to bow down together with the congregation. And therefore, if you can finish your Shemona Esrei before the congregation, before the Chazan reaches Moedim, fine. Then you could say your Shemona Esrei. If you're not going to reach finish the end of Shemona Esrei before the congregation reaches Moedim, then you should wait until they do the Moedim, because that you got to bow down with them. So that's Rav Huna's opinion. That is not the halacha. We do not do Kedusha on our own in our own private Shemona Esrei. We do not do the Kedusha, but we follow Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi's opinion, and that is that if you could finish until the Chazan reaches Kedusha, you finish your Shemona Esrei, then you can say your own Shemona Esrei. Otherwise, you really should wait for the Chazan to do the Kedusha, because the Kedusha is extremely important for you to recite with the congregation, and you don't want to miss that out. You will not be able to recite it in your own private Shemona Esrei. So that is the two opinions here. The Gemara does discuss afterwards, how do we know that you need a minyan for Kedusha? The Gemara will go into that afterwards. Now, I mentioned to you that I want to talk about Tosfos, because Tosfos here has a few very important points. Number one, bowing down from Moedim really, there is another option. And the other option is, what about if you daven Shemona Esrei and you reach one of the places where you're supposed to bow? So when the Chazan and the congregation bow at Moedim, you will also be bowing. So what's wrong with that? Why do you need to finish your Shemona Esrei before the Chazan reaches Moedim? You have an option of bowing. When you're bowing, you make sure to reach a place where you're allowed to bow, where you're supposed to do your bowing at the same time that the Chazan is doing his bowing, and that should be acceptable. So it seems that you do have other options. And Tosfos even brings that Rabbeinu Tam, when he would reach a place where you're supposed to bow in the Shemona Esrei, again, we bow 4 times during the Shemona Esrei. And the 4 times are the beginning and the end of the first blessing, we bow, and the beginning and the end of the second to last blessing. The Moedim and Hatov Shimcha, the beginning and the end of that blessing, we bow. In the beginning and the end and the beginning, those are the 4 times that we bow. Now, if you reach that place where you bow, when the Chazan reaches Moedim, you're all set. You bow, and the Chazan's bowing. The congregation you're all bowing together. So it looks fine. You're not showing that you are refusing to bow with the congregation. On the contrary, you're bowing with them. So Rabbeinu Tam, actually, when he was in the middle of davening, and the Chazan would reach Moedim, what did he do? So he used to bow as long as he wasn't at the beginning or the end of any blessing. He says it's not a problem. You're allowed to bow even during the Shemona Esrei, even besides the 4 times that the Chazan, that the Shemona Esrei requires every person to bow for. You are allowed to bow other times as well, as long as it's not the beginning and the end of other brachas, because you're not allowed to bow in the beginning and the end of any of the other brachas, because it sort of minimizes the importance, and the people won't realize the importance of bowing when the rabbis established the 4 bowings. But if you bow in the middle of a different paragraph, that's okay. You're allowed to bow. And therefore, Rabbeinu Tam used to bow whenever the Chazan reached Moedim. If he was in the middle of Shemona Esrei, he would bow then. And Tosfos explains that really that's only in a case of after the fact. Really, you're not supposed to set yourself up that way, because we're afraid that you will not remember to bow when the Chazan, you'll be too involved, engrossed in your prayer, you won't end up bowing with the Chazan. So therefore, because of that, you're really supposed to wait. You're supposed to try to finish till, to finish your Shemona Esrei, so that you'll be able to bow at Moedim when the Chazan reaches Moedim, and you'll be able to do the Moedim with the congregation. Now, Tosfos has another question, and this is a much more interesting issue, and that is, when there is a concept that we learned, it's called Shemea Koina, that when you hear something, it's as if you said it. So if someone has you in mind, you can fulfill your obligation because of the concept of Shemea Koina. Someone says it, it's as if you're answering. So there's a Rashi in the tractate Sukkah that says that if a person is in the middle of davening and he hears the Chazan do Kaddish or Kedusha, and of course you can't answer, you can't respond. So what do? So Rashi says, you think of that response. Shemea, if you listen to it, it's like you're saying it. So therefore, you fulfilled your obligation. So we have that is a huge question on this Gemara, because our Gemara says, you gotta do Kedusha, and you have to respond to Kedusha. Make sure to finish your Shemona Esrei before the Chazan reaches the Kedusha. It's not such a problem. Why do you need to wait? You have to finish your Shemona Esrei to reach Kedusha? No, you're in the middle of your Shemona Esrei. All you got to do is think of the Chazan is saying Kedusha. You have in mind that you're Shemea Koina, you're listening to him. It's as if you said the Kedusha. So you did your responses in Shemona Esrei. You didn't say the words, because that would be an interruption. You're not allowed to. But all you got to do is think of it. Think of those words. It's like you said it. So you fulfilled all your obligations. So what is our Gemara saying? That you need to make sure to finish your Shemona. Only if you have enough time to finish your Shemona Esrei, then you do and be ready for Kedusha. Then you can say your Shemona Esrei. Tosfos asks a very strong question. He says, no, do your Shemona Esrei, no problem. Kedusha, wherever you're holding, stop and listen to the Kedusha. You'll stop, you'll listen, you'll hear the Kedusha. What's the big deal? So Tosfos says that that sounds like a good option, but he says that it's much better to actually answer. And because it's much better, that's after the fact. If you answer, if you think of the answer, in other words, with the Chazan is having you in mind, so that's good enough. But really, preferably, you're supposed to answer. It's much more of a hidur mitzvah to answer and respond to Kedusha, to the extent that we tell you, make sure to daven and finish before the Chazan reaches Kedusha. And if you're not going to finish, don't daven, wait and say the Kedusha yourself, because that's more important than answering it and and listening and thinking in your mind as an answer, that's not as good. It's okay, but it's not as good. And so even though Shemea is Ka'ina, listening is like saying it, responding, but it's not as good. It's a Hiddur mitzvah to answer. And therefore, a person should make sure what our Gemara is saying is the preferable way is that make sure you finish Shemona Esrei to be able to respond to Kedusha. If not, then you do not even start the Shemona Esrei. Everyone follow that? That's a very interesting question that Tosfos asks that sort of uproots the whole statement of the Gemara. Everyone follow? People, should I repeat that, or anyone? Everyone with me? Okay. Now Tosfos argues with that, and Tosfos says that you really shouldn't do this. If you're in the middle of Shemona Esrei, Tosfos says, and you think of the Kedusha, and they're saying the Kadosh, 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 and you're thinking that and say, oh, I'm having in mind, I'm fulfilling my mitzvah. Tosfos says, big problem. Because then you interrupted your Shemona Esrei. Because if thinking is like saying it, if listening is like saying it, you've now said it. That's called interruption. You've now interrupted your Shemona Esrei. So Rashi says, no problem. It's like you interrupted you. It's like you said it, but it's not exactly like you said it. And therefore, you didn't interrupt your Shemona Esrei with words because it's only like you said it. Tosfos says, no, it's like you actually said it with words. It's considered an interruption, and you can't really do that. So Tosfos himself, Rabbeinu Tam and the Ri, that they both hold that you're not supposed to stop in the middle of Shemona Esrei and listen to Kedusha. Now, they both acknowledge that everyone does this. People do this, but they say this is wrong. Even though this is the minhag that people do, they say it's wrong because it's like you're interrupting in the middle of Shemona Esrei and responding to Kedusha, because thinking is like saying it. It's really like you said it. You now interrupted your Shemona Esrei. Rashi doesn't have a problem with this because Rashi says it's not like you actually said it. It's similar. It's considered like you said, but you didn't actually interrupt. Tosfos says, no, it's considered like you actually interrupted with words because you're listening. It's considered like saying it, and therefore you can't do it. So the halacha, of course, follows Rashi, but there is such a view, and we see it in Tosfos over here, that if you think of what the Chazan is saying, that would be considered a real interruption. And it basically boils down to what extent do we say Shemea Koina? Is listening like you responded physically, or is it only considered like you responded? And that's really the issue at hand. But this is a very applicable in halacha. If you're in the middle of Shemona Esrei and the Chazan is up to Kedusha, you have this argument between Rashi and Tosfos. If you should think of what the Chazan is saying or not. Of course, you're not allowed to say what the response is, but can you think it? And would that be a mitzvah? And of course, we follow Rashi that if you think it, and that's the custom. I think that if you think of what the Chazan is saying, it's like you responded. Yes, Ben. Ben. Ben.
Isn't what Tosfot is saying? It takes a while, I guess, till you hear it, but I'm speaking usually immediately.
Okay.
Isn't Tosfot similar to meharher?
So that was an earlier Gemara that we spoke about, that there's two things. Meharher is when someone else is not having you in mind. Shemea Koina is when someone else is saying the words and having you in mind. You're listening to someone else say the words. Meharher is you're just thinking it, but there's no one on the other side saying it. You're just thinking it. That's Meharher. Shemea Koina is someone is saying it and you're listening, and that's considered like answering. That's really considered like saying it, to the extent that Tosfos holds that it's like you interrupted your Shemona Esrei. Yes, Ezra. You're muted. Ezra, you're muted.
So here's the question. Suppose that you get to Shema Kolenu, or you get to that point where you can make a bakasha. and the Shaliach Tzibur gets to that same point, can you then say the Kedusha at the same time as the Shaliach Tzibur? Because the Bakasha is not considered to be a hefsek. So why can't you say the Kedusha at that point? That's the first question.
As far as I understand, the option of making a bakasha in Shemet Tefillah is not a sanctification. You can put in a request of your needs, but it's not the kedusha would not be the type of request that you'd be allowed to say there. It would still be considered an interruption.
Okay. And the second question,
at least as far as I understand. I'm not 100. I have to look it up, but that's what it seems to me.
Okay, and the second question is the very bottom, where the Tosfot basically talks about this in his response to En Yachid Mitpalel Kedusha. So
Yeah. Let me say that, Taisus, because that's what I was about to do now. I wanted to mention that. So instead of you asking, let me discuss that as well, because that's a very important Taisus, and that's what I did plan on mentioning it before the class is over. So let me first do that. If you still have a question, you're welcome to ask. So the other point that I wanted to bring from Taisvis is the bottom Taisvis. And the bottom Taisvis mentions that there is another option of doing Kedusha. The Gemara says a Yachid, an individual, does not say Kedusha. So you're in shul, and if you are an individual saying your Shemana, even though there's a congregation around you, but you cannot say Kedusha because you are a Yachid. There, the Taisvis mentions here that there is an option where you could be not considered a Yachid. You're not an individual, and that is, if you say Shmona Esrei with the Chazan, you would be allowed to actually be like a partner Chazan. And you could recite word for word with the Chazan and then continue the Kedusha. When you reach the Kedusha, you could say it with the Shliach Tzibur, with the Chazan, the complete Kedusha. And by doing that, you are not a individual. It's called you're like a semi chazan, and that is an alternative option of reciting. You're up to Shmona Esrei, and you recite the Shmona Esrei word for word with the chazan, and this way you can say the. There is an option to then say the Kedusha with the Chazan. Now, if I'm not mistaken, this is only a secondary option. It's not the preferable way to do it. This is it, if you did it this way, you have an option to say the Kedusha with the Chazan, and there are different opinions as to to the extent how important it is to say it word for word. There are opinions that say as long as you reach Kedusha with the Chazan, I believe it's a Tosfos Harosh, that says that if you reach the Kedusha at the same time the Chazan reaches Kedusha, that's also acceptable. Here, the Tosfos Harosh says, let me see if I have it here. I don't see it here. But I believe there are other views, and that it's possible, even if you didn't say it word for word. But of course, preferably you're supposed to say it word for word with the chazan and go reach the kedusha. And then once you reach kedusha, you say the kedusha with the congregation and with the chazan is saying the kedusha. You say it along with the chazan all of the statements. So if you're davening in an Ashkenazi shul, you daven the Lador Vador Nagid Godlecha. You say the bracha Hakel HaKodesh. You say it with the chazan, and then you can do your own thing afterwards, and go faster and try to finish before Moedim or so on. Yes, Ezra.
The reason why I ask this is because at weddings, many times they'll do a chatzi kedusha, meaning that everyone davens together up until and including the kedusha, and then after that the Sephardim will continue from that point on, as if it's as if you're saying the Shmoneh Esrei by yourself, but with the congregation. I don't know if the Ashkenazim go back and start again from the beginning and go all the way through, or whether the third option, which is the one that you just mentioned, that you run it at your own speed and make and daven and complete things before the chazan gets to the modim anachnulach. So
just 1 second, Ezra. So you're telling me that by the Sephardic custom, that when they do a half kedusha, everyone starts Shmoneh Esrei together with the chazan.
That's
and
correct.
Then they continue. Now, after the chazan finishes the bracha Hakel HaKadosh, does the chazan quietly finish, or does he continue out loud?
Everyone continues quietly.
Everyone continues quietly, not at the same pace, because you don't know. Everyone's quiet, but
right.
But everyone starts together. Interesting. Okay, that's interesting. Yeah, generally Ashkenazim, I've seen when they do this Hecha Kedusha, which I'm not so familiar with because it's not commonly done in regular. It used to be like a type of leniency that people, I don't know, in yeshivas they used to have some type of leniency, or they need to learn Torah, so they don't have time. I don't know exactly the source. I have to, but maybe we'll come to it. But I'm not sure by a wedding what the why it is, that people do such a leniency. Why should they do different than regular? What would the reason be? But in any event, in Ashkenazic custom, when they do that, they generally start the Shmoneh Esrei afterwards, right? So you're correct about that. It's interesting because I was once very surprised that they did this half a Shmoneh Esrei. Then I went to shul and I saw everyone talking during the repetition. I was like, now I understand why they do this half a Shmoneh Esrei, so that people don't talk. So then I was like, now it's not so bad. I used to think negative about the fact that they cut off half a Shmoneh, the other half. They're gypping us, they're cheating us, ripping us off. I expected a good Shmoneh, a repetition, and then I can't answer Amen. But then I saw everyone talking. I was thinking, maybe that's the reason why it became established, so that we wouldn't have such a desecration and the embarrassment to Hashem. So maybe it is something positive. I don't know. I'm not really sure the source of it. I do know that it's commonly done in yeshivas. And I'm not sure. And I think the reason in yeshivas is they think it's bittul Torah. It's they want to spend more time learning, which I don't know if that the logic makes sense, because if a person lengthens their davening, it says ma'arichan la'yamav u'shnaisav, you get longer life. So if you have more time davening, you'll actually have more time to learn. So, so the logic of cutting short your Shmoneh Esrei, the Shmoneh Esrei, is I don't know if it really works long term. So it's a nice short term bittul Torah. But then the question would be weddings. What's the excuse at a wedding? Why are they they're afraid they'll miss some of the smorgasbord maybe. So it's miss out some good food. I don't know what the excuse is by a wedding. Yes, Ben. Yes. Yes.
Rabbi, in a wedding, it would be that there might be a lot of people that are not going to shul. They're not used to davening. So they don't want to lengthen it because they'll just stand and talk.
Right. But I don't like that
So
idea
short
because
version.
what it sounds like is you're changing the Torah to fit the people. And that's, if they want to leave, let them leave. But I wouldn't change anything in the, from our tradition. If they don't, they don't want to sit through the whole thing, let them go out. But I'm not cutting short the Shemona Esrei because to make it compatible to other people. They should make themselves compatible to the Torah. We're not going to switch the Torah for them. Let them come to the Torah. If they don't want to, if they need a break, let them go outside. But so that's my claim to that. Anyway, I'm not sure. And the truth is there might be a source. I'm sure there's some sources for such things. I'm just not so aware of the source of that tradition yet. Maybe we'll come to it. Maybe Isaac, do you know? I see Isaac's over here hiding. Isaac? Okay.
I'm on mute, sorry.
Anyway, do you know the source for such a for the Hecha Kedusha? Maybe Mel? To do a half a Kedusha and cut short cut it short. Like why?
No, I don't know why. They used to do it mincha. They don't do it anymore.
Right. Okay. All right. Well, in any event, maybe we'll find some source later on. We still have many pages left to this tractate, and it should be somewhere here in this tractate. Yes, Ezra.
I might give you an idea. Perhaps they have to have the wedding while it's still daylight and they're getting very close, so therefore they do the Heicha Kedusha to get it done so that they can proceed to what is the reason why they're there, namely to have the wedding done before you move into nightfall.
Interesting. These are, I guess, the other option is that it's a mitzvah chasen, misameach chasen v'kala maybe, so they don't want to miss out. But generally, the minchas that we're talking about are after the chuppah, before and during while they're doing the pictures. So generally, you don't have it. It's really when people are just wasted. It's a lot of wasted time then. So that would not be a good excuse.
Actually, I see it before the actual chuppah, before everything else that's being done. They just do it to make sure that it's not forgotten somehow by everything else that's happened.
Okay, I've seen it both, but yeah, okay. All right. In any event, let's go a little further. So we're holding here in the Gemara where we went through these two opinions, Rav Huna, Rabbi Shua ben Levi, and we explained that there was an argument if a Yachid could say Kedusha, and now we have V'chein. V'chein, it is maybe 10 lines down from the top of the page, on page 21b. V'chein Amar Rav Ada bar Ava. Similarly, Rav Ada bar Ava says, Minayin. How do you know? She'ein ha'yachid omer Kedusha, that a individual does not say the Kedusha, even if they're with a minyan, but they're not part of their. How do we know that an individual doesn't say the Kedusha? And at least the Gemara before was talking about even though they're with a minyan, but they're not participating in the minyan, they're on their own.
Hi.
How are you?
Okay, so how do you know that an individual doesn't say Kedusha? You need a minyan. Shenemar, as it says, B'nekdashti, and I will be sanctified, B'soich B'nei Yisrael, amongst the B'nei Yisrael. That means that when is Hashem really sanctified? When he's amongst the B'nei Yisrael, a community, a congregation. Kol davar sheb Kedusha, anything, any item, any element of holiness, lo yehi pachos mi'asara, should not be with less than 10. Hashem is sanctified b'soich amongst the Bnei Yisrael. The Gemara says, what do you mean? How do you know it's a communal gathering of 10? My mashma, the Tani Rav Noi, Achua de Rav Chia bar Abba, because this rabbi learned, Asya toich toich, we have a Gzeira Shava. Gzeira Shava means there's a word in one verse and there's a word in another verse. And the rabbis have a tradition that these two words are meant to teach each other some element. That's called a Gzeira Shava. It's a tradition that the fact that this verse has one word and another verse has a similar word, that it's coming to let us learn one item, one law from the other. In only cases where the rabbis have a tradition can you do this, because there's numerous words that are repeated in the Torah, and we don't compare the laws of one case to another just because they have similar words. It's only when there is a tradition that these two words are meant to be learned one from the other. So Rav Nai, the brother of Rav Chia bar Abba, had a tradition, or told us about the tradition that there's a Gzeira Shava here, the word toich, that one place it says toich, and another place it says toich. And where are these two places? Ksiv hacha, here in Vayikra, it says v'nikdashti, I will be sanctified b'soich b'nei Yisrael, amongst the b'nei Yisrael. Uksiv hasam, and it says over there in our parsha this week, he badlu mitoicha eda hazois, separate yourself. It might even be in today's chitas, today's Torah study for today. Separate yourself from mitoich, from amongst the eda, this congregation, hazois, this congregation. In Ma'ala Halon Asara, Afkan Asara, just like over there in Kairach, in Parshas Kairach, it's talking about any group of 10 that you should separate yourself from any group of 10 people that are part of Korach's rebellion. You should separate yourself. And what that meant was any gathering, any of their gatherings that they had 10 people, you got to separate yourself. All the Yidden had to separate from all those gatherings. And therefore, the same thing is Hashem's holiness is sanctified. Hashem is sanctified in Toich, also amongst 10 people of the Bnei Yisrael. Now, there is another Gemara, and in some of the Gemaras, it's written on the side that there's some say that it's really meant to be written here. Now, how do you know that Hashem wasn't just saying individuals, separate yourself from any of Korach's people? How do we know it means his groups of 10 of his rebellion, the rebellious people of Korach's group, you have to separate. So maybe it means anyone in Korach's group. Maybe it means 2 people or 1 person. So on the side, it brings from another Gemara. The other Gemara adds that there's another Gzeira Shava. And the other Gzeira Shava is called Eda Eda. We learn Gzeira Shava from Eda, which is learned from the Meraglim. How many of the Meraglim were evil? It says ad mosai le'eda hara hazois. Until when will I have this bad congregation? Meaning the Meraglim who spoke bad about Eretz Yisrael. How many Meraglim were there? There were 12. How many spoke bad about Eretz Yisrael? 10. So Eda means 10. And so here also, that just like over there it says the word Eda, here also it says Eda. So because it says Eda about the 10 Meraglim, here also where it says in Korach's group, separate yourself from Toich Eda, from the Toich HaEda, from amongst this group, that you should separate yourself means from amongst any group of 10, separate yourself that are any of their gatherings, separate yourself from, and therefore when it says V'nikdashti b'soich b'nei Yisrael, it means I am sanctified. I should be sanctified amongst a group of 10 of the Bnei Yisrael. That's where Hashem is really sanctified. So if you really want to sanctify Hashem, you go to a minyan and you can sanctify Hashem. That's where Hashem is sanctified. Yes, Isaac.
I just sent you a text with the whole thing on the short mincha, where it came. It's a long thing, where it came from.
Okay. Okay, I'm gonna. Is that a WhatsApp? It must be a. No, I don't have the text.
A regular message to your phone. A text from Torah Music.
Didn't come yet. All right, I don't know. I don't know why. Which phone number?
That's what
954?
I'm gonna check now. That's what I'm gonna check now.
It should be the 954 is myself.
Oh, doesn't say
Okay,
anything.
good. So maybe we'll talk. Maybe we'll talk about this tomorrow. Mi'at Hashem. I know my time is up, but let's just see. Did we finish? Okay, just like over there is 10, here also is 10.
No,
Udekule alma mias mifsak like pasik. But according to everyone, however, the that a mifsak like pasik, that you can't stop in the middle of Shemona Esrei for your to answer and reply.
458-6000.
That's myself.
Okay.
Okay, we're gonna stop here, and well, to be continued tomorrow. Mi'at Hashem, maybe we'll talk about what Isaac found. Maybe we'll try to we'll discuss it a little more tomorrow. And I see Ruvain also just sent something. Please forward the text message. Just spoke. Oh, okay. I'll try to forward it in the email if everyone when it comes in. Okay, everyone. Sei gesund. Will to be continued.
Thank you very much, Rabbi.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi.